Intro here. Hello, everyone. I'm Joanne Gabriel, and on behalf of Darien Library, I want to welcome you to this evening's program, What We Grew Then and What We Grow Now, a look at the history of gardening. I am really excited to welcome Dr. Craig LeHoullier, a.k.a. North Carolina's Tomato Man, as he takes us on a genealogical tour of American gardens and gardening through the years to learn what cultural, historical, and even meteorological events impacted what we grew then, what we grow now, and what we might grow in the future. Before we begin, I would like to mention that programs at Darien Library are made possible by the annual Friends of the Library campaign. We thank you for your support to make programs like this possible and our collections available to the community. Our presenter this evening is the author of two best-selling books on gardening, Epic Tomatoes and Growing Vegetables in Straw Bales. His gardening obsession began in 1981 when he began tending his first garden with wife Susan. He soon joined Seed Savers Exchange, becoming an advisor for tomatoes, and became responsible for naming and popularizing many well-known tomato varieties. He is an amateur tomato breeder who continues to co-lead the Dwarf Tomato Project, a unique worldwide volunteer tomato breeding project that brings great tomatoes to those who choose or require container gardening. A popular lecturer across the country at major gardening events, as well as a frequent guest on podcasts and radio shows and Instagram. Please welcome Craig LeHoullier.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Boy, I get myself in lots of trouble, don't I? I could make my life a lot simpler, but I'm having a blast, and I'm so delighted to be doing another talk for the library because my tomato talk this year was one of my favorite events. And I'm also really excited to be doing this talk because not many people ask me to do it. It's a bit of a fringe. It's a bit of a departure for me, not being focused on tomatoes, but I've always loved gardening and history and genealogy, and this talk really works for me, especially since I've often been on the hunt for particular varieties. So when we think of gardening through the years, I think there's some really lovely terms such as kitchen garden. This is the food garden at the Seed Savers Exchange, and a cottage garden. It really evokes the country, the garden outside the door. So in Hendersonville here, this is my version of our kitchen garden, I guess. And this is a picture that I took today. This is my summer squash, green beans, cucumbers, eggplant, peppers, tomatoes in straw bale and container garden. It is also an obstacle course for our dogs, and they really love that. And right outside our back door, where if we just open the curtain every morning to let the dogs out, right off the porch, this is what we see when we wake up, which is our own little cottage garden of all types of flowers. So let's take you way back. Why am I going to start in the mid-1800s instead of prior to that? It is really because there wasn't a lot of stratification of different varieties leading up to the 1850s or so. And if you look at seed catalogs, the numbers of varieties were pretty limited. You can get a sense in the Thomas Jefferson Farm Book in the 1700s to early 1800s of the types of things you grew. There were a lot of varieties that came over from France, but really gardening in the US really started taking hold in the mid-1800s. And this is the oldest seed catalog image that I could find. And I'll show you the link where I found this at the end of the talk. But this is a McMahon Company, Philadelphia in 1804. So we're going to start just by dancing through the time points that I chose to get an idea of what was happening in gardening at the time. This is a page from the 1860 Thorburn. So in the mid-1800s, US seed companies were on the rise, selling a lot of European varieties. There were no hybrids. There was very little art. And in fact, there were very few descriptions. For example, in this dwarf or snap beans section, you see a whole lot of names. You see wonderful prices, 20 cents a packet. Sorry that the definition on this picture isn't that great, but it's really, really old. And in-ground gardening and farming is the focus. And if you look at dwarf and snap beans kinds, they would just use the numbers. 3, 12, and 13 are the earliest. So not a whole lot of info. Things started getting really exciting and really colorful in the early 1900s. And this is, I believe, when my grandfather must have started gardening. It was actually his garden that I used to walk through, and I would give anything to know what varieties he grew. So there's an explosion in the number of US seed companies. There are breeding breakthroughs, and that the companies are now starting to carry some US bred varieties, quite a few. Hybrids were not sold, but were often created for a starting point to create new varieties, just like we do in the Dwarf Tomato Breeding Project, where we breed 2 tomatoes, make a hybrid, and then work on it for 6, 7, 8 years to get something that's not hybrid, that is stable. Canning was very, very important. And if you look at that tomato on the Livingston Seed Company catalog, that's from 1900, that is pretty much the shape that seed companies were aiming for tomatoes, and the size. They really liked the 4, 5, 6 ounce round tomatoes. There were some photos, but mostly it was gorgeous art. And I feel really fortunate that through eBay and antique shops, I have a collection of about 400 of these old seed catalogs. And it's just fun to pick up a stack of them and flip through and just think about all of the time that the artists put into recreating what they were looking at out on the farm. In-ground gardening was still the thing. We're switching now to the mid-1900s. Victory gardens. Seed companies were now starting to consolidate. Indeed, many of the great ones were starting to disappear. Hybrids changed the paradigm because it was in the mid-1900s that companies started realizing, if I sold a hybrid, people now have to come back to this company every year to get it. So the effort to create open pollinated varieties started going by the wayside. When hybrids hit, companies stopped carrying a lot of those old varieties, so there became less to choose from. And I have a slide that's going to exhibit that. Still colorful, but the art is a little bit less creative. In fact, a lot of times you're seeing colored photographs. Vegetable varieties were pretty standard. Green bell pepper that turned red, your red tomato with an occasional pink. And now there was some talk of container gardening coming to the fore as well, but mostly when they talked about farming and gardening under the cultural sections, it was about growing in your garden. Here we are today. We have it all. Aside from the loss of some key historic varieties along the way that did go extinct, we have the biggest choice of any gardeners in history. Heirlooms have been on the rise ever since the mid-1970s. The Seed Savers Exchange was, of course, a real key to that. And the formation of the Seed Savers Exchange then gave rise to some of the great catalogs, such as Southern Exposure Seed Exchange and Baker Creek and Seeds Bloom and Victory. That meant people were starting to save their own seeds. And there became specialized companies such as Totally Tomatoes, or the Tomato Growers Supply Company, or the Cook's Garden, or the Vermont Bean Seed Company. And of course, anything goes: in garden, raised bed, containers, straw bales, hydroponics. So this is the time. However, take a look at this, and I'll talk you through it where you should take a peek at. Vertically, I looked at seed catalogs, and I looked at one from 1860, the Thorburn, the one from 1908, the Burpee from 1960, Burpee from 1998, and a Johnny's from 2019. And then I looked at some key crops, and we could get a sense of where the diversity was in the gardens, what people really like to grow. So in the mid-1800s, it was all about peas, 45 different types of peas, 4 types of eggplant, 7 types of peppers, 10 types of tomatoes. And part of this is due to the fact that Americans thought tomatoes were poisonous until we got a little bit beyond the mid-1800s. In 1908, peas were still holding their own, but all of a sudden, there were just tons of different melons being sold. Tomatoes have crept up, 52 varieties, peppers and eggplant, still not that many, and the other crops at somewhere in between. You hit 1960, and all of a sudden the numbers of peas available dropped precipitously, but beans started becoming the thing to grow. Tomatoes are still holding their own. Turnips took a drop of 32 varieties in 1908 to 6 varieties in the mid 1900s. And then here we are, 1998, and this is Burpee. So this is a catalog that's going to focus mostly on hybrids, lots of beans, only 23 types of tomatoes. But then let's look at what happens when you look at a specialty catalog that has a lot of heirlooms, such as Johnny's. 105 different tomatoes to choose from. And really, and 64 different peppers, because we now have lots of people that want to grow the hottest pepper. There's all types of pepper diversity. But the numbers at the bottom tell the story. We start off low, and then it looks really good. Lots of different varieties in the early 1900s, and then boom, mid 1900s, hybrids start predominating. The numbers of different types of things you can purchase and grow start dropping. Seed Savers Exchange forms, catalyzes the creation of specialty companies and heirloom companies, and our diversity is all the way up again. However, and I'll repeat it again, we cannot discount the relevance of the formation of the Seed Savers Exchange in 1975 by Kent and Diane Wheely for saving our botanical heritage, because things were looking pretty bad. The race was on to grow the prettiest hybrid that was adorning the cover of a catalog. And there were all kinds of anecdotes, such as if you don't grow hybrids, your garden will fail. Boom. This is the Bible of diversity, the Seed Savers Yearbook. I showed a picture of it on Edge because it is literally over an inch thick and contains thousands and thousands and thousands of varieties. And you can actually go online and use the exchange, the online version of the seed catalog, if you don't want to get a paper version. So now let's focus on individual crops and see what happened through the years to see which varieties that were popular at these times still exist today. What are their familiar names? And if we look in the mid 1800s, we do see some beans that have made it to today: Valentine, horticultural, refugee, case knife, cranberry bean. If we look at beets, it was mostly red, early turnip, blood turnip, yellow turnip. There's a yellow one in there. And we have whites. We have greens for stews. Look at those prices again, 10 cents per ounce of seeds. And I just had to dedicate a page to the mangelwurzel, just because it's a funny word. And it's something that I think, unless you're a farmer, you don't grow very often, but they are grown as a sugar beet type crop, very large roots to feed your cattle with. And apparently the cows are very happy eating them. And you can look at just a few different types that Salzer was selling. Salzer's Eiffel Tower mangle. Pretty cool. Let's move on to eggplant. Boring. Long purple, large purple. Improved New York white. Improved New York and white for ornamental. However, look at that improved New York. I obtained seeds from this, and this is improved New York growing in my garden, one of my Raleigh gardens in the early 2000s. And improved New York is essentially what you think of, or that type, when you see the big purple black eggplant in a store. And when I look at these, I think eggplant parmesan, because you can cut nice big slabs out of them. Look at lettuce quickly. Almost everything was green. Green head, hardy green, tennis ball. Brown Dutch was actually one that was kind of a reddish russet color. And it is available to grow today. So we can still grow tennis ball, Cos, which is essentially romaine lettuce, oak leaf, and brown Dutch. These are lettuces that have stood the test of time. Musk melons, interestingly, in the mid 1800s, it was all about the green fleshed ones. I like to go to Trader Joe and buy their Galia melons, Galia, because they're just a super delicious green flesh melon. That was actually the standard back then. And some of those green flesh melons are still growable today, except they're much smaller. And those of us who really like sweet cantaloupes or musk melons will probably find that some of these older varieties just don't have those sugar levels, but nutmeg and Jenny Lind and Persian all carry through to today. The mid-1800s, peppers clearly were something that was not a huge crop in America. Cherry pepper, sweet Spanish, small chili, and really what carries through to today is we still have hot or sweet cherry peppers. A squash pepper is really kind of a pimento type, it's a sweet, and of course bells and cayenne. I'm not going to, I know tomatoes are my thing, but I'm not going to linger overly long on them tonight. But I just wanted to show you this wonderful cut that came out of a mid-1800s catalog. Is anybody else hearing a funny sound, or is that just, okay, it's better now. So look at the shape of the tomato in the upper left. That was the exception rather than the rule. And as you can see, as the tomatoes got smaller, they got rounder. This is another beautiful cut. Bennery was a French seed company. And if you look in the lower right, there's that large irregular picture. But these are just a sampling of the types of tomatoes that were available to grow in 1876. What's interesting to note is that speckled one in the middle right. And also, if you look at how ribbed and ridged the larger fruited tomatoes were. Now, I can't tell you a lot about this, but in a pretty well-known garden, there is a group that actually was excavating, and when they excavated, they would plant sections of the soil. And the sections of the soil, when they planted it in the greenhouse, grew a tomato plant. And I'm working with them on this kind of super secret little project, but they gave me seeds to grow out, and this is what the tomato looked like in my garden. I don't know the fate of this project yet, but compare that picture to the picture in the lower right and the picture in the upper left. So if that's true, then I have seeds of a tomato that's been around an awfully long time. Let's look at tomatoes, cherry, pear, plum in yellow and red. So when we grow yellow cherry, yellow pear, red plum, we're growing tomatoes that actually are around even before the mid-1800s, well into the 1700s. And you see Fiji Island, which is extinct, large, irregular shaped pink tomato. But looking at the history of it and the places that it may have traveled, there's a chance, a remote chance, that German Johnson, if you hear my dog barking, it's because something's going on outside. Sorry about that. Big ridged pink tomato. So Fiji could be related to German Johnson, and the cook's favorite is extinct. Mammoth is extinct. Mid-1800s with flowers. Now these were hand-drawn, beautifully colored. The types of flowers that were popular in those days: asters, balsam, an annual that very few people grow anymore, dianthus, petunia, phlox. These, you think of these as all cottage garden type flowers: sweet williams, stocks, hollyhocks, mignonette, which used to come in all types of different colors, and it's hard to even find it anymore. And it's a flower that was so fragrant that it was planted in window boxes. When the horses would go and leave their waste in the street, having mignonette in the window boxes would help make the indoor air hopefully smell a little better. Pansy and coxcomb. How sad is this? This is a page from a mid-1800s seed catalog, flower section. No descriptions, no pictures, just a list of lots of flowers. So now we're going to skip ahead to the early 1900s and see what's going on. And I'm going to only highlight the new things that showed up, and wax beans showed up. Yellow string beans started showing up in the early 1900s. Beets were still pretty standard A couple that we can grow today are Crosby's Egyptian and Detroit Dark Red. They're some of the standard beets. New York Improved is still on the list. This is a page from Burpee in early 1900s, and all of their eggplant were dark purple. Again, with lettuces, they're all green, and we've got Butterhead and Iceberg and Koss. Early 1900s, salmon flesh melons all of a sudden started coming in, but the main melons of the day were still Emerald Gem and Rocky Ford, which were green fleshed, and Rocky Ford is actually the forerunner of the Galia type melon. This is 1924, but I found this in a seed catalog, and it's close enough to the early 1900s. But the watermelon Moon and Stars was actually available in a seed catalog for just a few years, the Henderson Seed Company. And here's a picture of Kent Wheely when he rediscovered it in the mid 1980s, growing in a farm very close to where he started the Seed Savers Exchange. Now, some of the bell peppers that we're familiar with are starting to show up in the catalogs. They tended to be big and oblong and thick-walled in green, and they would ripen red. And they list Ruby King in this catalog. It was renamed World Beater, and I actually got World Beater out of the USDA section seed storage unit, and here it was growing in my 2000s garden. Really nice big bell pepper. Early 1900s, we have to return to tomatoes, and it was all about Alexander Livingston. And he did his work between 1870 and 1920 and put out a huge variety of tomatoes. And I love this page from one of his early catalogs where he shows that he had peach tomatoes and yellows and pinks. And this is just a partial list. And he liked to put this list in every one of his seed catalogs. And some of the varieties you see here are still available to grow today, such as Paragon, Perfection, Golden Queen, Favorite, Beauty, Stone, Gold Ball, Buckeye State, Honor Bright, etc. And Mike Dunton and I, Mike of Victory Seeds and I were hunting seed collections to try to recover. And we found 90% of the Livingston varieties, and they can be grown today. Every now and then you'd find really cool varieties that I rescued, such as this one, Ferris Wheel, which the Sulzer Seed Company released in 1894 and is one of my favorite tomatoes. Got that out of the USDA collection. And here it is growing in my 2018 garden. I actually grew it in Hendersonville last year and absolutely loved it. And then I found a few more famous old tomatoes hiding in the USDA collection as well. And they're now listed by seed companies such as Isbell's Golden Colossal from 1918. And there it is growing in my garden in Raleigh. And a tomato that a lot of people have contacted me about, Winsall, because when I taped the Growing a Greener World session with Joe Lample back in 2016, I opened it with a story about an elderly man who was so shocked that I was selling Winsall tomato plants at the farmer's market. And here it is in the page where it was introduced. And here it is growing in my garden. Early 1900s was all about flowers such as asters, carnations, hollyhocks again, mignonette, nasturtium. What's interesting is sweet peas really hit their stride right around this time. And in fact, they would sell 115 different sweet peas, and they would have them by different colors. So 10 different blues and 15 different reds. Whereas now, if you were to look at sweet peas, you can only find blends. Mid 1900s, this book is one of the books that really triggered my love of gardening, Crockett's Victory Garden. He had his TV show on PBS, and he was a huge influence. Now the seed catalogs got a little bit more boring looking because a lot of them just had black and white catalogs. Now the move was to bush from pole beans, and the effort was to make them stringless so that when you picked them and wanted to cook them, you didn't have to pull the string. Beets, what can I say? Mid 1900s, red still predominates. Mid 1900s, black and purple eggplant, no Asian types, no whites, no pinks. Mid-1900s, lettuce, vastly green. Simpson, Grand Rapids, and Slowbolt are all available to grow today. Melons, salmon fleshed now predominate. So we've now made the switch from the green fleshed melon to the salmon fleshed melons. And I think the majority of the seed catalogs at that time carried those. And then for peppers, the only new things were Hungarian wax and Golden California Wonder. Otherwise, it was kind of the same old stuff. This is important because here is the photograph. Here's the page that flipped the paradigm on gardening from open pollinated and being able to save seeds and developing varieties that could become heirlooms to hybrids. This is the 1949 Burpee catalog. Burpee's a big boy. And this was a big seller for them. It was really popular. It was the time of the Victory Gardens. And once Burpee hit gold with this, the vast majority of seed companies then just put all of their efforts into developing new hybrids. As far as mid-1900s with flowers, again, Crockett also put out a book called Crockett's Flower Garden, and that became hugely influential. The covers of the catalogs were really attractive. These are the types of flowers that were popular in the mid-1900s. Sweet peas were in the decline. In fact, whereas you could get 100 or 150 different types 50 years prior, now you could maybe get 5 or 10 types, and they were predominantly mixes. The big things were petunias and zinnias. Snapdragons and impatiens were really taken off. Marigolds really took off. This is the sad thing. The older the seed catalog, the more the seed companies went into the effort of creating separate colors for any given flower. So you could get yellow marigolds, you could get 10 different types, etc. The whole advent of the mixes. So you want to get the petunia mix, 8 different colors. And I just liked it when you had the choice of buying the mix or the separate color better. So now here we are today. And because of the Seed Savers Exchange, because of all of the seed companies that emerged, because of all of the heirlooms that were saved by gardeners all over the world, look at, this is a bowl of the beans. And we're not even looking, of course, at the pods, which can also be all different colors. But the diversity in the seed color with beans is often the attraction to a lot of people. And the fact that bean colors are so distinct is often a way to tell if you have the authentic variety or if you have a cross. You grow a bean and you know what the seeds were like when you planted it. And if the seeds in that bean come out differently, then you know you have a problem. Look at what we can now do with beets. And the red beet has been added to by the Chioggia, which is the one that when you cut it, it has the white and red bullseye in between. We've got golden beets of different hues. We've even got white beets. We've got beets that have very dark reddish green foliage. And so the whole thing about cooking with beet greens has become a thing. And beet greens are one of our favorite greens. And if I look at some of the recent Johnny's catalogs, the efforts with beets seem to be making them smoother and better flavor. Beets are one of those unusual vegetables that tend to be a love-hate thing. They produce a substance called geosmin, and it's the same substance that if you walk outside in your garden and it rains a little bit, it smells earthy. That chemical is present in beets and gives them that earthy taste that some people don't like very much. We've found some beet preparations that we love that minimizes that geosmin funky character. And one of the biggest offenders we found is with Chioggia, the white-red zoned one, beautiful beet, but it's the earthiest one of the ones we've eaten. Today's eggplant, and these are all from my garden. Some of these are varieties that I've developed by dehybridizing, taking hybrids from catalogs that I've purchased, saving the seed, and just see what the diversity looks like. everything except the green with lavender striped one at the top came from the hybrid Orient Express. The one at the top came from the bees crossing Casper with something, probably a black one, because I've gotten all kinds of different colors. But now eggplants have been discovered, and there are all kinds of different shapes, sizes, and colors. And I think using them in different ethnic preparations has helped with the increase in popularity. And lettuce has just seen an incredible explosion and all kinds of different colors that people are growing. Now, lettuce to me, homegrown lettuce to me is the thing. It's sweet, it's tender, it's delicious. I've not found, and I've grown a lot of different colored lettuces, but I've not found a hugely different flavor between them. What I've found is the hugest flavor between those that you purchase at a store and those that you grow yourself. But we like to play with our food. And so we grow lots of different colors just to make our salads interesting. Microgreens are a big thing. It's one of the biggest advances in farming is microgreens in specialty markets. And Johnny's, if you look at their lettuce selection, it's really clear that they have moved in to try to take advantage of that. Today's melons. We have the best of the old and the best of the new. And we have melons from all over outside of the US. We have green fleshed and orange fleshed and ones that are barely white fleshed. We have seedless watermelons. And some of these changes you may say are advances and some maybe not. Some people will say that seedless watermelon will never taste as good as a seeded watermelon. And I will concur that the two best watermelons that I've ever eaten are Moon and Stars, that had seeds, and Bradford, and that had seeds, but it didn't matter. They were worth the effort. And I've had some seedless watermelon that have come close. There was a farmer at the Raleigh Farmers Market that sold 10 to 12 pound orange flesh seedless. And if you hit it just right, it was one of the best watermelons I've had. But for the most part, not quite. All of these peppers I grew in my Raleigh garden. I just spread them all over the floor one day to show the diversity. And these really are all just different sweet bell peppers, including a lot of my dehybridization work on here as well. Pretty much all of the ones on the right, the different bells, the lavenders and the yellows are from me working with the hybrid islander and then working over 10 years to see what kind of colors I could get out of it. We've got green pimento peppers and chocolate peppers and the Corno de Toro frying peppers. And I don't even have a slide on hot peppers, but the range of heat and colors to the point, and the heat to the point of real pain, I just can't do the habanero types, but they're just beautiful. And I actually like to grow hot peppers and spread them around in my garden just to make the garden beautiful and colorful. And of course, tomatoes. So again, with tomatoes, we have just about all of the old and so many of the new and everything in between. And a lot of people have asked me why I've chosen tomatoes to focus on. And to me, there are three crops that have the greatest color and flavor diversity and have interesting stories associated with them. And it's apples, melons, and tomatoes. Now they're a beautiful eggplant, but really homegrown eggplant all pretty much taste the same. It's good. You cook it and make wonderful things with it. Bell peppers, all kinds of different colors. They're either unripe and taste kind of like munching on the lawn, or you let them go to their ripe color and they're wonderfully sweet and you can roast them. But tomatoes is where you get all of the nuances of tart to sweet and fullness to blandness and peachiness. With flowers today, as I said, even more so, there are less separate colors and more mixes. And even the types of flowers that have become really, really popular seem to have narrowed down. You know, if you drive around and look at what people are planting on medium strips or in their gardens at home, you see a lot of petunias. You now see the little cabricola, which are the morning million bell versions of petunias, which you can't grow from seed, you have to grow from cuttings. So I guess companies create them by doing hybridization, and then the nurseries grow plugs out. Lots of impatiens, lots of vinca, and that's where a lot of the effort is, making different vinca colors, lots of daylilies, lots of interesting colored iris, and lots of marigolds. But there's no mignonettes, there's no balsams. You don't see sweet williams as much. Lots of flowers missing. So where I wanted to go next is to talk about how to find some old varieties of seeds, because this describes some of the ways that I've filled my garden up with so many unique varieties. So if you Google GRIN, Germplasm Resources Information Network, GRIN, they have a network of where they hold seed all over the country, and some of their locations are for different crops, but you can search it. And that's how I found Ferris wheel and Livingston's Magnus and Pica Perfection, where you think of a variety that you're looking for, maybe something that a loved one had grown and you think it's lost, and you can put the name in the box, and it will come up with a listing. And if it's available to distribute, it will say 50 seeds, and you put in your information, and it's free. There's no charge. You just click the button and submit it. And in a few weeks, a packet of those seeds come in. And I get a lot of emails from people looking for particular varieties, some tomatoes, some other things. And what I'll often do is do a search and get the seed, and then I'll send them the seed. Hopefully lots more people are learning about this and will do the search. Old varieties of vegetable seeds certainly are in the great diverse seed catalogs that have popped up. And, Victory Seeds, of course, my friend Mike owns it, and he lists all of our Dwarf Tomato Project varieties. So I have a great fondness for his company. Part of it is the historical accuracy that he applies to his trade. His descriptions are very, very full. And I can say the same thing about Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. I've been friends with them going way back. They're the company that actually released Cherokee Purple to the world back in 1993, after I sent them a sample in 1991. And the owner at the time, Jeff McCormick, grew it and called me up and thought Cherokee Purple was kind of funny looking and wasn't sure that people would want to grow it after they saw how funny looking it was, but it's caught on. And my friend Ira Wallace there now runs the show, and they, again, wonderful descriptions and just a great selection. But I could go on and on. Of course, you've got Johnny Selected Seeds, which has not only lots of heirlooms, but also the newest and best hybrids being created right now. I've been a big fan of Stoke Seeds for many, many years. So there's just a lot of seed companies. But for me, the most important company of all is the Seed Savers Exchange, because without them, and again, I've said it a few times, without them forming in 1975, we wouldn't have had the previous page with the two seed companies, Victory and Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, because they wouldn't have had the heirlooms to be able to form their company about. So it was really important. And they'll be celebrating their 50 year anniversary in a few years. And I still think in the gardening public, they're still relatively unknown. And the most numbers of listed members in the Seed Savers Exchange, the numbers of people who are actually saving seeds and distributing them out, was just a little over 1,000. And when you think of how many people there are in the world, that's an extremely low number. But it also tells me that few are really chosen to the point of obsession to get involved in heirlooms and seed saving. But the Seed Savers has a great catalog where they actually sell a lot of different heirloom types. but they also have the exchange where you can.
Hi there.
Hello? Could you mute, please? I think I sent out the wrong link, and there are lots of Craig LeHoulliers on this call, but I guarantee you I'm the only one. Now, this is a warning about seeds, because we're talking about gardening then and now we're talking about gardening now. When there are lots of heirlooms being grown and there are lots of companies being formed, it doesn't mean that there are some mistakes that are happening. And some mistakes may be willful and some may not be. But I've got 3 examples here. And I'm not going to talk about the company, but the 3 things will illustrate. This is the right story, and it's about the introduction of Golden Queen, which is a variety from Alexander Livingston, but it's the wrong tomato, because Golden Queen is not a stupefyingly brilliant orange. This is actually a picture of Golden Queen, which is a 1950s or so variety that was released by Stoke Seed. So this is erroneous. Golden Queen is a somewhat oblate lemon yellow tomato, and we have found the real one. This is an example of the correct story. I mean, sorry, this is the correct tomato, but is the wrong story. So orange Russian 117 hails from the famous seed bank of the former Soviet Union. This tomato was bred by a friend of mine, Jeff Dawson, who gardens in California, by crossing Russian 117, which is a variety that was in the Seed Savers Exchange, with a bicolor. He created the hybrid and then he worked on it for about 10 years, and it was released to the public somewhere in the 1980s. So this is a ploy that some seed companies occasionally through the years will use to create some buzz about a variety, but you have to be careful. And this is the right tomato, but the wrong history. So White Queen, introduced by Livingston in 1882, Livingston never created a white tomato. White Queen was a variety that was released by, I believe, Earl May or Henry Field in the late 1920s. And I've actually found that by looking through the link that I'll show you in a little while. So these are all very misleading things to do. And I really want seed companies to really try hard to find the correct information before they list things in their catalog, because everything has a name and everything has an appropriate story. And that story does not need to be elaborated to make a profit. So that's my little sermon for the evening. So now I just wanted to end by showing you just some great pages that I've found in seed catalogs over the years that exhibit how gardening has changed. This is from an 1868 Vic Floral Guide, and they would have a page in their catalog called Gossip with Customers. I'm not going to read all of it, but another season has passed away, and with it all the floral beauties that made summer and autumn so attractive. The past season in many parts of the country was rather unfavorable, especially for the smaller and more delicate seeds. Third paragraph, my customers, so far as I've learned from many letters received, have met their usual and most gratifying success. So isn't it great that the owners of a seed company that would probably get lots of letters would look through those letters and collate them and do a gossip with their customers? Hyperbole. So what is used in today's seed companies to try to create the buzz? And it could be, oh God, what would be the sexy tomato shot, the food porn shot? It would be adjusting the coloring, putting a tomato or a melon or something on the cover that was colorized to a point where you could taste it on your tongue, or But the problem is you grow it in your garden and it doesn't quite look like that. So here's an example in a Salzer's catalog. And Salzer's was just a wonderful seed company that was in La Crosse, Wisconsin from the late 1800s into the mid 1900s. And the paper was really cheap and fragile, but they packed so much information into every page that those are the ones I really go back to and study the most. And look at what the artwork is. They would have a cabbage sitting on a pedestal that was so big that some guy with a feather in his cap was on top of it, and everybody else was standing around oohing and eyeing. And at the bottom, absolutely sure heading, 999 out of 1,000 plants will produce a head. Hyperbole, exaggeration. Here's one of my favorite pages to do with tomatoes from the Mall Seed Company in 1904. And they called this the enormous tomato. And they had the yardstick up there, 8 to the yard. And then in a picture below, they have this young lady. She looks kind of like a doll that would have been popular at the time, I guess. And she says 7 of our enormous tomatoes make a yard. So we don't know if it's 8 to the yard. We don't know if it's 7 to the yard. Greatest of the main crop tomatoes, absolutely the finest large tomato. However, if you flip through Mall's catalog, they list lots of tomatoes, and every single tomato is the largest tomato without exception. So this is how they exaggerated. I love this. And then because you're doing art, not photography, you could make a cabbage field look like there was no possible way that you could get between those plants because, right, what did we say? 999 out of 1,000. Perfect heads, and the guy's in his little carriage there, and every cabbage is perfect and stacked up. And then I'm sure all of you who grow tomatoes, your tomato plant looks like that plant on the left edge, right? You've got your vine, it's all nicely espaliered or trained, and there's simply more tomatoes than foliage on it. So this is also from a 1904 Salzer seed catalog, and the quote of the guy there is, well, seeing is believing. Now Salzer's giant tree tomato, that type of tomato is known as climbing triple crop or tree or giant tree. Seeds of it used to be sold in Sunday supplements of the Sunday paper, and it really is either a large fruited, tall, indeterminate. They can be potato leaf or regular leaf, but they don't produce like that, of course. Another page that will take you back and make you envious for times is these collections. So 35 packets of the earliest and best vegetable novelties, post-paid for $1. And if you can see the pictures below for a 50-cent collection, but they're including asparagus, beets, beans, corn, 2 types of cabbages, and on and on. I love this woodcut from the Mall Seed catalog in 1905 because they talk about the operation and how it all happens, where the seeds are packed, the flower seeds, the mail room, everybody just busily working, everybody laid out perfectly, all efficient and just one seamless process, right? But this is what they wanted to give you the impression of if you order seeds from the Mall Seed Company. They got this. It's all in hand. And just for your amusement, these are garden implements from the mid-1800s, the Garden King cultivator and the auto spray pump and Stevens hand fertilizer sower, the Apollo lawn sweeper. Just really, really cool. So anybody who's into genealogy or history, spending a few hours with these catalogs, maybe with a glass of wine, it's really fun. Here's a peek into the early 1900s life. This is from a catalog where you're on the farm. You can actually see a ladder back there. So there's some kind of a fruit tree. It looks like melons were grown here. There's baskets of melons on the right. There's baskets of tomatoes on the left. And and those look like they're shiny. So they're probably vine ripened. And anybody who knows, if you stack tomatoes like that, the ones on the bottom are probably not going to last for very long. And we got some eating going on and some sowing going on. So that's just a typical peek into early life. And our journey ends here, but I've got a few more slides. But this is Thorburn Seeds, and I showed quite a few of their catalogs. And this is a picture, mid-1800s in New York, of the horse-drawn carriage that is picking up seeds for delivery. So I'm a nostalgic guy, and anybody who's seen my tomato talk has seen this. I garden because my grandfather Walter on the left brought me into his gardens when I was 3 or 4 years old, and my dad Wilfred on the right would bring me to parks and show me flowers. So my garden journey started here with the first garden that we planted in my yard in Pawtucket, Rhode Island in 1962. So I was 6 years old. My brother was 2 years old. My outfit's pretty bad, but his outfit is worse. I'll just be thankful of that. I do have my 2 books, and people who are interested can contact me by email if you want a signed copy. And the deal these days is you get both my books signed with about a half a dozen packets of really interesting seeds. So I shared a lot of information with you about how people gardened over the year. And now it's time for all of you on this Zoom, or if you watch the Zoom after, to go grow a gardener yourself. Find someone to share your passion with and just get them into it. So how to get in touch with me? CraigLeHoullier.com has my blog, frequently asked questions, speaking events such as these, although I'm not as disciplined with those as I should be. Instagram is really better these days, or my blog, my project. Email nctomatoman@gmail.com. I am on Instagram. In fact, I've left Facebook and Twitter a couple of years ago. So if anybody wants to catch what I'm doing in the garden, I'm on Instagram @nctomatoman. And I've just started a little series, Plant of the Day. So each morning I get up and I go out in the garden and take a picture, and I feature something I'm growing. And then every Thursday, I go live from my driveway. Sometimes it's just after I water. Sometimes the dogs are running around the yard. Sometimes, like last week, I'm chased indoors by a thunderstorm. But usually we'll take people on a tour of the garden, and these are at 1-week intervals. So you can see how things are growing, but I save them all. So you can go to my Instagram page to the videos tab and find out. If you don't get to watch them live, you can see them after the fact. And then I take usually 20 minutes to answer whatever questions pop into people's minds. And then for the last 2 years, I've been in a great adventure teaching a course, Growing Epic Tomatoes with Joe Lample. It's all online, it's all self-paced, except everybody gets their whack at Joe and I for an hour every Friday, where you can bring all of your questions and we hold a Zoom. That course will relaunch next March, and next spring, there will be a new organic vegetable gardening course that Joe is going to launch, and I'll be having more about that on my blog and on Instagram. But this is the link. For garden history buffs, make sure you mark this down, take a picture of the screen. It's archive.org/details/USDA-nursery and seed catalog. It is the Henry Gilbert Nursery and Seed Trade Catalog Collection. There are more than 70,000 catalogs, fully digitized and searchable, and you can search them by text. You can search them by year. You can look for, what I typically do is I'll put in Salzer and then have them sort it by year released, oldest to newest. And they are digitizing catalogs all the time. So for the last thing that I want to say, and I think Joanne mentioned this at the beginning, we've seen that through the years, People garden particular ways, and they varied their types of crops. Different types of things grew in popularity, and some ebbed and flowed. And I mentioned one of the last things I said was we are very lucky to be gardening now, just because of the vast array of wonderful things that we can grow in our garden. However, we also are at a unique time in gardening history where we're having to figure out how to get things to grow well. As an example, when I lived in Raleigh for 28 years, gardened in my driveway the whole time. The first year we moved in there, we had 5 days of 90 or above. The year we moved out in summer of 2019, we had 70. So what happens with temperature and weather has incredible impacts on your garden. Watering, feeding, disease, pest, what you can grow, what will set fruit. So one of the beauties of gardening is that it causes you to think on your feet and to develop techniques that work for you. Now, farmers, of course, this is a really big deal for them because they're growing food on large scales and they have to really make things work. But those of us who are home gardeners, our job every year is to start with a plan and then have that plan in our head and realize that within day 5, that plan may be changing because the forecasted weather, you're getting frost that you don't expect, or you're getting a stretch of 95-degree days you don't expect, or you get more hailstorms. So gardening to me is always a thinking hobby. It's being in a bubble of peace and joy, growing your own food, listening to the birds, doing something healthy. And I hope I shared something in this talk that will pique your curiosity, reveal a little something about how your grandparents or great grandparents may have gardened, and maybe make you feel thankful that you get to garden now, judging on all of the great things. So Joanne, that's my talk, and I'm going to stop sharing and just take some questions.
Excellent. I'm going to start with, can you just explain for our audience what a hybrid is?
Absolutely. So what happens with a hybrid is somebody typically in a seed company has figured out that if I take the pollen from one variety and apply it to the flower of another variety, and a fruit forms, and you have to actually take the anther, the pollen bearing bodies off that flower before you apply the pollen, because for certain crops, such as tomatoes and peppers, they're perfect flower, meaning if everything goes well, they'll self-pollinate. So you need to remove the anther at just the right time, apply the pollen, a fruit will form. The seeds in the fruit that forms are the hybrid. So if you grow sun gold tomato, the seeds in the packet that you buy are from a handmade cross in a greenhouse, and that tomato forms and they process those seeds and they put the tomatoes in the packets. So a hybrid can never be an open pollinated or heirloom variety that you save seeds from and expect to get the same thing. Because if you grow out seeds saved from a hybrid, you'll get things that look like mom and dad and all the little cousins and aunts and uncles in between. Now you can use a hybrid to start creating a new variety. Our Dwarf Tomato Project, we created hybrids by crossing tall growing indeterminate varieties with dwarf varieties, aiming for the best color and flavor. And then we knew we'd get a hybrid that would be indeterminate. We saved seeds from it and we started selecting out the dwarfs. 8 years later, we have new named varieties. I could talk for hours just about this, but I think all you need to know is a hybrid is created by a handmade cross of two varieties that are kept secret. Nobody but the company that created it knows what the parents of sun gold are. So once a company takes a hybrid off the market, you'll never be able to grow it again unless you write lots of letters to the company and pressure them to create it again.
So if you took those sun gold tomatoes and you grew them and you planted and you saved those seeds from those sun gold, they would not be sun golds the next year.
They would be sun gold second generation, meaning they were being very, very diverse. And people have been trying to do this for a long time, trying to get an offspring that was just as wonderful as the hybrid, and no one is there yet. People have edged up to it and they've got some good tomatoes. I've gotten pinks, whites, yellows, oranges, reds, all kinds of diversity, but none of them have the flavor of Sun Gold.
Uh-huh. So interesting. The question is it a bad thing to grow a hybrid?
Awful. No. Hybrids are neither bad nor good. Let's say that a gardener is an artist that has a palette. Hybrids are just one of the paint on the palette. Lemon Boy is a wonderful hybrid tomato. Sun Gold is wonderful. I wouldn't be without Sun Gold. So use hybrids. Maybe you have terrible disease for certain things in your garden and you need to stick to hybrids that have certain protections on them to be able to get a decent crop. So hybrids sometimes help people that can't grow certain things otherwise to get some of your crop in. However, what's really nice is to have an array of different things in your garden. That way you get to test the diversity, because the diversity of heirlooms in terms of flavors, colors, sizes, etc., is always going to be greater than hybrids. There's maybe 10,000 different heirloom tomatoes where maybe there's 250 or 500 different hybrid tomatoes. So I don't demean anything. I just decide what is it that I want to grow, test lots of things out, and if you like it, keep growing it. And if you don't, try something new.
Okay. Here's a question. Do you have any idea as to why the melons switched from green to salmon?
I don't, except there must have been a salmon fleshed variety that created something different enough. And we know what we're like as gardeners. If we see anthocyanin tomatoes or striped tomatoes, if we see things that are different, often there is a subset of gardeners who like to flock to that. They like to be on the cutting edge of things. I would suspect a company sold an iron flesh melon. It might have been Tip Top. That's a variety that goes back into the 1800s. It was very tasty, and maybe an area of the country decided that their consumers liked orange flesh melons or salmon flesh melons better than green, and that started to tip the tide. Interestingly, there are still regional preferences. So in Arkansas and areas of the South, pink tomatoes are favored over red tomatoes, and that preference goes way back into the late 1800s, early 1900s. So different areas of the country, different clientele develop preferences. And we eat with our eyes. And I remember when I first started selling tomato plants, I could not talk certain people into buying anything other than a red tomato. Well, my family only eats red tomatoes. So I'd say, okay, I'll sell you this red tomato, but I'm going to give you a green fleshed one. I'm going to give you a purple one. Within 5 years, they were back for the baker's dozen of tomato colors. My family loves the colors. We now play with our food. I want a purple one and a white one and a chocolate one. Grocery stores also tell us how to eat. And so if a grocery store has nothing but red tomatoes and green peppers, et cetera, a lot of the non-gardening public is going to think that's what I want to eat. And really, gardeners and chefs become the sharp edge of the spear. We become the cutting edge that then drives change. Invite neighbors in, have a tomato tasting. It's, as you can tell, I love this because it's a fun process to take part in helping to get people to open their eyes and try wonderful things that they never would have thought they would have liked before.
That's great. Any tips to help folks identify heirloom/open pollinated seeds?
Well, if all seed catalogs did the right thing, every hybrid would have an F1 in parentheses after the name, and in the description it would say Sun Gold F1 hybrid. So you've got to look for that. And if it doesn't say anything, then you should be able to assume it's open pollinated. Now, you'll notice that you never see hybrid beans in seed catalogs because I believe it's just not worth the cost to create them. So pretty much all beans are open pollinated. I think pretty much all peas are open pollinated. However, you will often see a PVP meaning patent variety pending. So you can save seeds from that and grow them yourself, but you can't save seeds then and sell those seeds. So you get into some really interesting idiosyncrasies on labeling. But if you don't see F1 hybrid, you should assume it's open pollinated. Now, Shepherd, I think it was Shepherd Company, used to have 3 hybrid tomatoes, Dona, Larissa, and Carmelo, and they were all F1 hybrids. But in one catalog, it wasn't clear that they were. And all of a sudden, Save Seed of the 3 started showing up in the Seed Savers Exchange yearbook, but they could have been F2s or F3s or who knows. So you got to be really careful about paying attention. And if you have any questions on that, you can always email me, because I kind of keep track of, the buzz and what's on. And sometimes you have to you have to know the style of a catalog to know where they list this information and such.
And the melon question is followed by another question. How do you identify the ripest melon in a grocery store with the best sweetness? Or is it,
well,
yes.
If I could figure that out, I wouldn't be bringing in the occasional bad melon back to Trader Joe because it was flavorless. Melons are really hard. And for cantaloupes and musk melons, they're called slip melons. And if anybody's ever grown them, when they're ripe, you just gently press down where the stem attaches to the fruit and it just pops right off. And that's when you know they're ripe. But what I suspect happens is some of them get picked not quite at that stage, and maybe the little stem is ripped off a little bit. But that's it. So when you're at a store looking at melons, what I like to do is just see if the stem can be depressed in a little bit where the stem was, and then smell it. And if it smells sweet, you have maybe an 80 or 90% chance of that being a delicious sweet melon. Honeydews are really, really hard. And I'm batting only 500 with honeydews in purchasing them. And I've had some of the best in my life, and I've had some that just go right back to the store. Watermelons can be really tough. And the wisdom is there's a place where watermelons sit in the ground that is whitish, but as they ripen, that becomes yellow. So if you look at a bin of melons and they have a nice yellowish spot on them, they should be okay. I don't understand the thumping thing, the flipping thing, or any of that. When you grow them, it's supposed to be that the little pigtail tendril closest to the fruit, when that dries up and drops off, you can pick your melon. But it's never going to be an exact science. And like I said, I'm a huge watermelon eater, and I've been disappointed more often than I have been delighted. So what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
Anything else?
I think we'll wrap it up with one more question. The Seed Savers Exchange, is it international? Like, so let's say you have a history where you had seeds from another country, from some grandparents, and could you, and you know the name of the seeds, and could you buy them on Seed Savers Exchange? Is it international?
So there are several ways in which it can be international. Number one, there's lots of people in different countries that are members of it.
Mm-hmm.
What's complicated that is increasing inability to ship seeds into different countries from the US and into the US from different countries. There's been some concern about different diseases getting in. And so there's kind of been a lockdown on that. One of the reasons that Petrina and I had to split the Dwarf Tomato Project to Australia versus the US is because she couldn't get seeds from me anymore, and I couldn't get seeds from her anymore, and we had to go it alone. However, there are people from different countries that participate. The other thing is a lot of what's listed in the Seed Savers Exchange has come over from Europe or Asia or South America or you name it. And it's been, so if the Seed Savers has been there for almost 50 years, it's got quite a collection. And if people are looking for particular things, they can always email me. I know the people at Seed Savers, and I can just ask them to search their data banks for this or that, and they can look for it. Family heirlooms are great, and Mike Dunton at Victory likes to work with me So when people will send me a family heirloom, my goal is to get it in a seed catalog because that reduces the risk of it going extinct. And there's a fellow named Walt Swokla from Connecticut who sent me his grandmother's tomato, and I loved it. And I sent it to Mike, and Mike and Walt talked, and now Canselmo Family Heirloom is there. People are buying it and loving it. And Walt was so excited that he now buys packets and gives them to relatives for Christmas. So it can get people really thrilled to have a piece of your family heritage and being able to grow that in your garden.
That is really exciting and encouraging. And I think we'll stop there on a very positive note. Thank you so much for everyone for attending this evening's program. Fascinating look at our vegetables and our seeds and where they came from and where they are now. And thank you, Craig, for the wonderful talk, and hope to see more of these kind of talks in the future.
My absolute pleasure. We'll
Okay.
be talking. Have a
Okay.
great garden, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.